The day my CEO told me his son would be taking my office, my space, my work, my 11 years of holding that company together, he said it like I was a piece of furniture he could drag into storage. No warning, no conversation, just entitlement wrapped in a smile. And while everyone assumed I walked away powerless, they had no idea what I had quietly built, or how deeply the company depended on the very things only I knew. Stay with me, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you've ever seen a company treat someone like this. When people talk about the backbone of a company, they usually picture executives in glass offices or someone with a fancy title on a nameplate. I never had either of those things. What I had was an old desk wedged between a storage closet and the server room, a coffee mug with a chipped handle, and a key card that let me into every corner of Titan Ridge Fabrication because they needed me everywhere. For 11 years, I kept that place breathing, not because anyone asked me to, but because without someone connecting all the broken pieces, the whole operation would have snapped in half. It still amazes me how little people understand the kind of work that never gets applause. The kind that isn't flashy, doesn't show up in quarterly reports, and definitely isn't something the CEO brags about during investor dinners. But it's the work that keeps vendors from walking away, keeps payroll flowing, keeps compliance inspectors from shutting the doors. And for more than a decade, that work was me. I came in before sunrise most mornings because the overnight automation almost never ran right. Our inventory system liked to freeze whenever a supplier changed their format. Our workflow software crashed if more than 3 people uploaded documents at the same time. Those were things no one saw because by 8 a.m., everything was working again. I made it work again. I learned the systems the way some people learn the backroads of their hometown. Every glitch had a pulse. Every data inconsistency had a pattern. I knew which vendor would forget to attach delivery confirmations every single Thursday, which machine operator mislabeled components because he was colorblind, which safety protocols needed manual updates because the software patch never actually patched anything. And I carried all of that in my head because writing it down didn't help. Too much change too fast. Some people call it institutional knowledge. To me, it was survival. Titan Ridge ran on outdated software, aging machines, and a leadership team that believed technology magically fixed itself. They assumed automation meant autopilot. They assumed my job was typing on a keyboard all day. They assumed everything worked because the system was good, not because someone was quietly dragging the system forward day after day. I can't count how many times vendors called me personally instead of the general line. "Catalina, I know you'll sort this out," they'd say. And I always did. Not because I was paid well, not because anyone at the top appreciated it. I did it because the workers on the floor needed parts on time. They needed a system they could trust, even when leadership didn't understand the value of that trust. Looking back, I realized I had more power than anyone knew. Not the kind you flaunt, not the kind with titles or spotlights. I had the kind of power that came from being the only person who truly understood how every moving part fit together. And in a place like Titan Ridge, that kind of power is dangerous, especially when the wrong person decides they don't need you anymore. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where everything was already running hotter than usual. One of our vendor portals had stalled mid-transfer. The shipping database had thrown out a string of corrupted entries, and I'd spent the last hour cleaning up numbers that should have never been wrong in the first place. I was in the middle of reconciling a batch of mislabeled hydraulic components when I heard the footsteps. Not hurried, not hesitant, slow, confident, entitled. Graham Lockwood, our CEO, walked in with that familiar expression of a man who had never once worried about the consequences of his decisions. He didn't even glance at the monitors filled with red alerts. His attention was on his phone, thumb scrolling while the whole back office sat on the edge of a technical meltdown. When he finally spoke, his voice had that casual tone people use when they ask you to shut a door or pass the salt. "Catalina, quick thing," he said. "Chase starts Monday. He'll be needing your office." I stared at him, not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to make sure I'd heard the sentence exactly as delivered. Flat, dismissive, and dripping with the kind of arrogance only inherited power could produce. Chase, his 26-year-old son, the one who called himself an operations influencer because he posted time-lapse videos of himself typing with motivational captions. The one who believed an MBA and a ring light made him a leader. My office wasn't even that special. Small, windowless, barely big enough for 2 chairs, but it was mine. It was where I kept the whiteboard, with every workflow cross-reference for the plant, the emergency manual overrides, the safety rotation maps, and the vendor cycle patterns only I could decipher. It was the only space in that building where the chaos could be controlled, and he wanted to hand it to his son like a prop in a photo shoot. I waited for him to look at me, to acknowledge what he was asking, but he didn't lift his eyes from his phone. That told me everything. This wasn't a conversation. It was a decision handed down from a man who believed the foundation beneath him was indestructible. "Of course," I said. 2 words, calm, smooth, not a crack in my voice. If he noticed that I wasn't arguing, he didn't show it. He just nodded once as if I'd signed a contract and walked away. I sat still for a long moment, listening to the hum of the servers behind the wall, the faint clatter of machinery from the production floor, the heartbeat of a company that ran because I held its nervous system together. Then I stood and looked around the room, not with sadness, not with shock, but with clarity. 11 years of building, stabilizing, rescuing, and patching so many broken systems. All of it reduced to an afterthought because a man wanted to give his son a shortcut to authority. I packed only what mattered. My notebook, the one filled with internal patterns, cross-references, and the contacts of every vendor who trusted me more than the company line. My travel mug, dented but loyal, and the external drive containing every script, every tool, every custom integration I had written over a decade. Not proprietary data, not company secrets, my work, my intellectual output. The very code that leadership believed was fully automated, unaware it needed constant human interpretation. Everything else, the desk, the dead plant, the second monitor Chase would probably replace with a camera stand, I left exactly where it was. I typed a short message to HR, the kind that revealed nothing but said everything. Transitioning to remote temporarily during office reassignment, available as needed. No drama, no warning shots, no explanations. Then I walked out of that building without turning back. And the truth is, I didn't feel defeated. I felt something else, something sharper, colder, and far more dangerous than anger. I knew exactly what was woven into the walls of that company. I knew what would happen without the one person who understood its pulse. They wanted me gone. They were about to learn what that actually meant. The following Monday, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, not to rescue Titan Ridge, but to enjoy the strange quiet that comes when you stop holding the world together. I brewed coffee, opened the blinds, and watched the sun rise over Denver like it had been waiting years for me to notice it. Then my phone buzzed, a notification from social media. Chase had posted a photo from what used to be my office. He'd set up a ring light in the corner, rearranged the desk so the logo on the wall would be perfectly visible behind him, and typed some caption about revolutionizing outdated operations with a fresh perspective. Seeing that post didn't hurt me. It irritated me, not because he was in my space, but because he thought the job was about aesthetics. That office wasn't a backdrop. It was a command center. And he had no idea what any of the whiteboard markings meant, or why my systems only ran smoothly because I guided them manually every single day. What I did next was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I didn't log in to check reports, didn't sift through error messages, didn't rescue missed data transfers like I usually would by sunrise. I simply waited, and right on cue, the first crack appeared. At exactly 7:50 a.m., the inbox dedicated to vendor status updates began filling itself with flags. Normally, I cleared those before anyone even poured their first cup of coffee. By 8:15, the weekly operations digest, something everyone assumed the system generated on its own, was nowhere to be found. The managers waited 10 minutes, then 20. Then I heard the faint buzz of my phone again, an email from Chase addressed to the entire leadership team and copied to half the company. "Catalina, where is the Monday report?" As if I were simply running late, as if the entire process were a button I clicked from my couch. I didn't respond. Instead, I tilted back in my chair and listened to the messages pile up one after another. A call from the production supervisor asking why order sequences looked out of alignment. A message from procurement saying 3 invoices didn't match their purchase orders. Confusion, frustration, a citywide ripple of realization that the quiet woman in the corner office did far more than anyone ever admitted. Chase eventually called IT, and poor Theo spent 3 hours explaining that there was no automatic report generator. There never had been. I'd built that report manually every week because the system was too outdated to compile data correctly. Meanwhile, I made another cup of coffee and opened the spreadsheet where I'd been sketching out a business plan. Nothing ambitious, just the idea of offering consulting to a few companies who needed help untangling their operations. Something flexible, something mine. I knew better than to feel guilty about the chaos unfolding without me. People like me often do. Women who've spent years cleaning up everyone else's messes without praise, without raises, without acknowledgement. But guilt is heavy, and I had carried far too much already. By midweek, the second crack appeared. A compliance notification from the State Safety Board had landed in Titan Ridge's general inbox. A routine inspection, the kind that needed specific documentation within a 48-hour window. Easy if you knew where everything lived. Impossible if you didn't. On Wednesday afternoon, Chase called me. Not emailed, called. "Hey, quick question," he said, using that tone men use when they want something without admitting they need help. "Where do we keep the safety protocols?" I kept my voice steady. "You'll find them in the compliance database." "Right, but I can't get in. What's the password?" "I only provide support through my consulting services now." Silence. He didn't like that answer. He definitely didn't like the rate I quoted next. By that evening, he'd given up. The 48 hours ran out. Panic began seeping through the cracks in ways he couldn't hide from his father. And all I had done was stay home. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was simply the world, functioning without the person who held it together. Or failing to. By Thursday morning, I could feel the unraveling even from miles away. Titan Ridge had always been noisy under the surface. Systems grinding, data shifting, vendors adjusting. But now that noise had turned into a roar they couldn't ignore. And for the first time in 11 years, none of it was my problem. I didn't have to check the workflow logs to know things were slipping. The signs were already reaching me in indirect ways. A voicemail from a warehouse supervisor who sounded exhausted. A short email from procurement wondering if I had a moment. Another message from a vendor who normally called me only when things were on fire. I didn't answer a single one. The real explosion came Friday morning because that was Vendor Reconciliation Day. Most people at Titan Ridge never knew what that meant. They assumed invoices and orders magically lined up, that payments went out because the system handled it. What they didn't understand was that our ERP software was older than some of the interns. It couldn't read half the formats vendors used. It couldn't match delivery codes with their purchase order numbers. Every Friday, I spent hours stitching together mismatched data like a surgeon closing up wounds. Without that work, everything bled, and it did. By noon, a vendor called me directly Steel Core Solutions, one of the most reliable partners we had. "Catalina, are y'all all right over there?" Mara, their shipping coordinator, asked. "Your new guy is approving invoices that don't match anything. We've got 3 discrepancies already. Should I be worried?" I didn't sugarcoat my answer. "I don't work there anymore, but if you need operations consulting, I'm available." She didn't hesitate. "Good. We've needed someone who understands manufacturing for a long time. How soon can we start?" That was the moment I realized something. My absence didn't just expose Titan Ridge's weaknesses, it illuminated my value to everyone else. While they were losing stability, I was gaining opportunity, but Titan Ridge had bigger problems than a few mismatched invoices. Compliance Week rolled into the next disaster. OSHA had arrived for their annual review. Normally, this was routine. They'd walk in, ask for updated chemical handling protocols, accident reports, training rosters, and I'd hand everything over neatly organized, cross-referenced, and verified. Chase didn't even know where the documentation lived. He spent 3 days chasing paper trails that had never been digitized, trying to translate old spreadsheets I updated manually, and rummaging through binders that hadn't been opened since the last inspection. I heard all of this, not because he told me, but because word travels fast in an industry where safety violations can shut down production overnight. The inspector wrote up 6 violations. 6, because nothing matched. Nothing was accessible, and nothing demonstrated proper record keeping. That triggered something far more expensive. A review by Titan Ridge's insurance carrier. Compliance failures meant risk. Risk meant cost, and that cost hit them like a hammer. Their premiums went up 40%, 40, overnight. That was when the second call came, not from Chase this time, but from Graham himself. Catalina, he began, using a tone he hadn't used with me once in 11 years. We've run into a bit of trouble, just temporary setbacks. We could really use your help getting things sorted. I let him talk, piling on excuses, trying to sound like a man still in control of the company he barely understood. When he finally paused, I gave him the same answer I gave his son. I only work on retainer, 3-month minimum. He sputtered a bit when I stated the rate, which was more than Titan Ridge had paid me in a quarter, but I didn't back down, and I didn't agree, because the truth was becoming clearer by the day. Titan Ridge wasn't collapsing because I left. It was collapsing because the moment I stopped holding it up, there was nothing underneath. They built their empire on my shoulders. They were just now realizing what happened once those shoulders stepped away. The Monday after Graham's desperate call, I sat at my kitchen table again, but this time I wasn't watching Titan Ridge fall apart. I was watching something new rise in its place. My place. I had already signed with Steel Core, and Mara forwarded my name to another supplier before lunch. By mid-afternoon, I had 3 meetings lined up. Real meetings where people valued what I knew instead of treating me like a replaceable cog in a machine they barely understood. I didn't plan to build a business this quickly. I thought it would be a slow, careful transition. But opportunities kept coming, one after another, and I realized Titan Ridge wasn't the only company struggling with tangled systems, and leaders who thought software replaced skill. The whole industry had cracks, and I had spent a decade learning exactly where they were. The real turning point was when I reached out to Renee, the production scheduler they'd laid off during Chase's efficiency overhaul. She had 15 years of experience and a mind that ran cleaner than any automation script. When she picked up the phone and I offered her a spot with me, she didn't even hesitate. "Just tell me when," she said. Then I called Marcus, the maintenance lead who could read the machines by their sound alone. Titan Ridge tossed him aside like outdated hardware. To me, he was irreplaceable. When he heard I was starting something new, he laughed, not out of mockery, but relief. "About time someone in this industry knew what they were doing," he said. By the end of the week, the 3 of us were sitting in my basement, laptops open, planning our first full-scale consulting project. It wasn't glamorous. Folding chairs, a wobbly table, a single lamp that buzzed whenever the washer kicked on. But it was ours, and it felt more like home than Titan Ridge ever had. What surprised me most wasn't the work. It was the respect. Steel Core didn't ask if I really understood operations. They didn't question my judgment or ask for explanations meant only to reassure fragile egos. They trusted me. They listened. They paid promptly. They thanked me. I didn't realize how starved I'd been for simple acknowledgement until I started receiving it. Our first project wrapped in 3 weeks ahead of schedule, and Steel Core immediately asked to extend the contract. Then Richardson Forging reached out. Then Apex Hydraulics. Word spread faster than I could respond to emails, and suddenly we weren't a makeshift team in a basement. We were a company. Reyes Operations Consulting. The name felt strange at first, almost too bold, like calling myself something I hadn't earned. But I had earned it. 11 years of saving a company that never valued me built the foundation for something far stronger than Titan Ridge would ever be again. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. While Titan Ridge scrambled to fix the chaos they created, I was working with their competitors, strengthening them, stabilizing them, helping them grow. Every mistake Graham and Chase made pushed another client toward my inbox. They had thrown away their greatest asset, and now I was becoming everyone else's. And for the first time in my career, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't overlooked. I wasn't dismissed. I was the person companies called when they needed someone who actually understood how to keep their world from falling apart. Everything they took from me became the reason I succeeded. Everything they ignored became everything others depended on. And the best part? I was just getting started. By early spring, I didn't need inside information to know Titan Ridge was spiraling. The signs were everywhere. Vendors I never expected to hear from sent polite messages asking if I was still available for guidance, which was their diplomatic way of saying Chase had no idea what he was doing. A procurement manager from a long-term client called me privately and asked if the rumors about delayed shipments were true. I didn't confirm anything, but the silence on my end told her enough. Within a week, she pulled her company's contract. It was only the beginning. Titan Ridge had always walked a thin line between stability and chaos, and for years I had been the invisible weight keeping that line steady. Without me, every oversight they had ignored became a disaster waiting for the right moment. And those moments arrived like clockwork. One client after another reported missing parts, incorrect deliveries, or payment delays. The leadership team tried to blame vendors, weather, software bugs, anything but themselves. But the truth always leaks through cracks like these. The next blow came when the quarterly numbers were released. I didn't see the report directly, but word traveled fast. Revenue down 22%. Operating costs up nearly 40% because they kept hiring expensive consultants who couldn't untangle the systems I had managed for years by instinct alone. Their stock price fell hard, dipping to levels they'd never seen. Another client left. Then another. People started whispering about a potential merger, but only if Titan Ridge could prove they weren't a sinking ship. They couldn't. Not long after, I bumped into an old co-worker at the grocery store. She looked tired, eyes sunken, posture weighed down. "It's bad in there, Catalina," she said. "Really bad. Chase crashed the inventory system last week trying to optimize something. We were down 3 days. Orders piled up. Customers were screaming. Graham is acting like everything's fine, but the board is furious." I wasn't surprised. I had predicted this outcome months earlier, back when I walked out with nothing but my notebook and my drive. But hearing it put into words was different. It reminded me how much wreckage they were willing to tolerate before admitting they didn't understand how their own company worked. Another vendor called me a week later, Apex Hydraulics. Their tone was sympathetic but blunt. "We're giving Titan Ridge 2 more weeks," they said. "If they can't get their house in order, we're switching suppliers. But we wanted to check if you were taking new clients." I was, but only selectively, and the fact that companies were coming to me before abandoning Titan Ridge said more about their collapse than any earnings report could. Still, I didn't gloat. Not out loud. What I felt wasn't pride, it was clarity. I had spent years softening the consequences of their incompetence. I had protected them from damage they never even realized they caused themselves. Now, without that shield, they were experiencing the reality they had been insulated from for more than a decade. Their decline wasn't sudden. It was simply visible for the first time. My team and I were thriving. We had moved from my basement into a small office downtown. Renee handled scheduling like she had been waiting years to do it for people who respected her. Marcus organized our on-site assessments with the efficiency Titan Ridge never appreciated. And me? I was finally choosing where I put my energy and who was worth receiving it. Titan Ridge had taught me one thing. A company that doesn't value its foundation doesn't deserve to stand. And every day that passed, they proved that lesson with painful clarity. The day Graham showed up at my house, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that feels like the world is bracing for something. I saw his car long before he knocked. Sleek, expensive, completely out of place in my quiet neighborhood. He sat in the driveway for a full 5 minutes, shoulders slumped, hands gripping the steering wheel like he was trying to gather the courage to face what he had created. When he finally walked up the steps, he didn't have the confident stride of a CEO. He looked smaller, worn down, as if the company had been chewing on him for months. I opened the door before he raised his hand to knock. His eyes widened when he saw me, like he expected me to look the same as when he pushed me aside. I didn't. I felt stronger, steadier, unbothered. "Catalina," he said, voice cracking at the edges, "we need to talk." I stepped aside without offering a smile. He walked in like a man expecting the floor to collapse. I didn't offer him coffee, didn't offer him a seat. I simply let him stand there and feel the weight of the silence he once dismissed. Things have gotten complicated, he began. Complicated. That was the word he used when he erased 11 years of my work. The board is asking questions, he continued. Clients are leaving, our insurance premiums are through the roof, and well, Chase isn't adjusting as quickly as we hoped. I almost laughed. Adjusting. As if incompetence were a temporary condition. As if his son's ignorance could be smoothed out like wrinkles in a shirt. We need you back, he said finally. Full authority over operations. Any office you want. Salary restored. Benefits. Whatever you ask. I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to feel it, the realization that he had thrown away something irreplaceable and only recognized its value once the loss became unbearable. Then I placed a folder on the table between us. He reached for it like it might bite him. Inside was the 6-month report for Reyes Operations Consulting. Revenue, growth, client list, projections, everything he assumed I could never build without his company. He flipped through the pages slowly, his face shifting from confusion to disbelief to something like fear. This can't be right, he whispered. You're bringing in this much? More, I said, and we're booked through the end of the year. He looked up at me, eyes fragile. Catalina, what do you want me to tell the board? And for the first time, I saw him as he truly was. Not a leader, not an authority, just a man who had never understood the value of what stood right beside him. Tell them the truth, I said. Tell them you replaced the person who kept your company alive with someone who didn't know the difference between a workflow and a filter. Tell them you dismantled your foundation because you thought loyalty was automatic. His mouth opened, then closed. There were no arguments left, no defenses, he had nothing. So you won't come back? I can't return to a place that treated me like I didn't matter, I said, especially now that I know how much I do. He left without another word, and for the first time since walking out of Titan Ridge, I felt something, close to peace. They hadn't just lost me, they had lost their chance to ever earn me back. 2 weeks after Graham walked out of my house, Titan Ridge announced that Chase was transitioning to pursue new entrepreneurial opportunities, which everyone in the industry correctly interpreted as code for being quietly removed. But removing him didn't save them. The damage was already too deep, the cracks too wide. Their biggest remaining client pulled out after a shipment arrived missing half the components. Another partner suspended negotiations until Titan Ridge could demonstrate operational stability, which by then had become a phrase people used politely instead of saying what they really meant. The place was sinking. Their stock hovered near historic lows, rumors of a merger swirled like vultures, and compliance penalties remained under review. They hired a high-end consulting firm from Chicago to rebuild everything I had once maintained on muscle memory alone. 4 months, $200,000, and they still couldn't recreate what I held in my head for years. The parts they could rebuild cost them money they no longer had. The parts they couldn't rebuild cost them trust they could never earn back. Meanwhile, my life expanded in ways I hadn't imagined. Our new office, small but sunlit, buzzed with purpose. Renee ran scheduling like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Marcus handled on-site assessments with the calm confidence of someone finally valued for his expertise. We added 2 more consultants, then a part-time coordinator, then a second office across town. Companies that once brushed me aside now waited weeks for a slot on my calendar. Not because I needed them, but because they needed me. One afternoon, I received a message from Chase. A short paragraph about learning from mistakes and hoping I'd be willing to share advice over coffee. I didn't answer. Some lessons aren't meant to be retaught. Some consequences must be lived through. And some people only learn the value of what they had after losing it completely. Titan Ridge tried to erase me. Instead, they carved out the space where my real career began. When I look back at everything that happened, the lesson that stays with me isn't about revenge. It's about clarity. For years, I convinced myself that loyalty meant staying quiet, staying small, staying grateful for whatever scraps of respect I received. But the truth is much simpler. People will value you only as much as you value yourself. I learned that walking away isn't a failure. Sometimes it's the only move that protects your sanity, your future, and the parts of yourself that companies gladly consume if you let them. My revenge wasn't loud. I didn't slam doors or burn bridges. I stepped back and let the natural consequences settle on the people who created them. And watching them face the fallout wasn't sweetness. It was justice. A reminder that neglecting the backbone of your operations isn't just short-sighted, it's reckless. But what surprised me most was how much peace came from choosing silence. Silence isn't weakness. Silence is a boundary. Sometimes forgiveness frees you, but sometimes silence is the sharper knife. Not because it wounds, but because it lets you walk away clean while others sit with the mess they created. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't underestimate the power of what you know, what you've built, or the quiet ways you've held things together. And don't wait for someone else to acknowledge your worth before you act on it. In today's world, especially in workplaces that praise shiny titles more than real skill, you must be your own advocate. If your voice is ignored, find a place where it's heard. If your work is dismissed, find a path where it matters. The freedom on the other side is worth more than the stability you're afraid to lose. How to get started today. Write down the real value you bring to your work. Skills, relationships, insights. Set one boundary this week, even a small one. Reach out to someone who respects you and discuss your next career step. Take one action toward independence. Update your resume, research consulting, or learn something new. If this story resonates with you, tell me in the comments. Share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.